Hello, I'm Amy Hickman, and this is for my media clip final project for TESP 350 at Fort Hays State University, summer 2019. First question, define least restrictive environment and discuss this concept as it relates to models of delivery for special services. And I'll read this. The textbook says, according to federal special education laws, the educational placement for students with disabilities that is as close to the general education classroom as feasible. This means they should spend as much time as possible with peers who do not receive special education. So we should try to incorporate them into a general education classroom as much as possible based on their individual needs. IDEA says there are two different things about LRE that are important. The students should be with the kids in general education to the maximum extent that is appropriate. And then special classes, separate schools, or removal from the general education class should only happen when the student's learning or attention issue, if that's their disability under IDEA, is so severe that supplementary aids and services can't provide them with appropriate education. So it all depends on the individual student, what fits, and that's why I have an individuals. Each student has unique needs. The different scenarios I kind of have put out here: general education classroom with support or co-teaching. The student would spend pretty much the entire day in the general education classroom. They would receive support and services from either a para or an aide, or maybe even I put co-teaching because the co-teacher could actually go in and teach with the general education classroom teacher and be there. The other one I have is partial mainstream / inclusion classroom. We called it pullouts in the last intern school I was in. And this would be where the student spends part of the day in the general education classroom, and then they get individual, or in there we did 2 or 3 students at a time, usually 2 students. We did have one, she was on individual pullout. And the rest of the time they spend in general education classroom, usually with a para for certain subjects. And then there's special education class, which also can be called self-contained. This is where they get specialized instruction with other kids with similar learning needs. So there's not any general education classroom time there. And then special programs outside of the school district, which means they would go to a separate school or separate, like a special private school, residential programs, hospital programs. So they wouldn't see any general education classroom. Okay, so the assessment process. Why is the assessment process described as a cycle, and what are the components of the special education assessment process? So the assessment process is a constant cycle of improvement. Data gathering is ongoing. We do not stop assessing the students. This is why I included the 4 arrows, which are the 4 main phases of the assessment process. And now we'll go through each phase. Phase 1. In the identification and referral phase, teachers, parents, or anyone can identify students that have not gained in the general education curriculum through classroom interventions or are suspected of not gaining in their general education curriculum. This referral could be to special education or just other general services. This stage may vary greatly depending if the child is before school age or already in school. So before school age, most school districts hold what we call child finds to locate children with possible disabilities. And they do this, I think it's birth to 3. So then in school, parents, teachers, and other staff can complete checklists or look at assessments to determine if the students are struggling. These students usually get placed in a pre-referral stage, and then modifications or interventions may be put in place to assess the students if they need. This I consider like MTSS and RTI is the interventions, and then once they make it to, say, tier 3 and they aren't progressing, then this is when they're referred for special services. So the actual referral for special education services must be completed in writing, and the referral starts the whole cycle in motion. The parents or guardians must be notified in writing, and that's per federal law, of the referral or any testing that may be done for special education programs. And then we move on to phase 2. So phase 2 is determination of eligibility phase. The parents have already been informed, and this is when a plan of action comes into play, and they have to design an IEP, which is an individualized assessment plan. The parents do have to give their permission for the assessment to begin. So then the IEP will include all the steps that will be carried out throughout the assessment and the reasoning behind each step for that certain student. The IEP will include all formal and informal procedures used for the assessment. While creating the IEP, a parent interview could be used to obtain information about family history, medical background, and anything that they could help with their child. Then administration does the scoring, and interpretation of assessment procedures should be followed as directed by the manuals that accompany each published test. The results will then be shared at an evaluation meeting, which the parent should be a part of. Parents should be informed at the same meeting whether their student is eligible or not eligible. So that would be their decisions about eligibility. And then we move to stage 3. Program planning stage is where the evaluation team now has a time clock. It starts the 30 days because as soon as they're eligible, there's 30 days to design and plan the IEP. Once the IEP is finalized, the parents must agree to the IEP. If there's not an agreement about the IEP, there are steps that have to be followed. There is voluntary mediation, and if that doesn't come to a conclusion, then it must go to a due process hearing, and that will be the final decision. And then on to phase 4. Phase 4 is the program implementation and evaluation, and it starts as soon as the student's parents or guardians have consented to the IEP, and then the IEP will be passed around to general education teachers, special education teachers, or it depends on the student what all is involved in their IEP. Everybody that is going to be involved in it will get a copy, and there will be it will be put into place. It will be reviewed and revised on an annual basis. There will be formal and informal assessment procedures to make sure the student is progressing, and if they're not, then it'll all start over again. So that's why it is an entire cycle, because of the ongoing monitoring and making sure that the students are progressing. And if they're not, then something needs changed. All right. Describe at least 5 strategies a professional can use to encourage family participation in the special education assessment process. And I actually put 6 down here. I have communication, commitment, equality, skills, trust, and respect. And I started out with communication. All the communication with parents should be clear and frequent and open, honest, and tactful. I think you have to be all of these and positive with the student, with the parents, in order to encourage family participation in the special education assessment process, because this is just the way everybody should be treated. Commitment should involve caring, flexibility, consistency, and accessibility. Treating people like humans instead of cases can help encourage families to participate in the special education assessment process. Equality. Equality requires advocating for the students' and families' needs, reciprocating communication, empowering and validating the parents' ideas, and maintaining harmony throughout all interactions. In doing this, you're just, when I say validating parents, I mean valuing their input. It is their child, our student, their child, and they've obviously been around them longer than any of us have, so empowering them and validating them through that is a good idea. And then skills, professionalism, and being prepared. It'll just go a long way in the eyes of a parent. I mean, if we look professional and act professional, and it kind of carries into the next one. Trust, reliability, dependability, truthfulness, discretion, and keeping their children safe. I mean, trust is required to encourage the family. Same with dependability. We need someone that the parents can count on. Truthfulness is honestly the only way to keep their trust. Then discretion is very important to families, especially when it comes to their children. And then keeping their children safe. That's what everybody wants. Respect. Respect, being courteous and non-judgmental, are just a couple ways we can show respect to anyone, but it is extremely helpful when we are trying to encourage families to participate in the special education process. All right, derived scores. The first thing is all 3 of these are norm reference test scores, and they're all based on the mean. Percentile scores make me think back to when my kids were babies and their heads were in the 95th percentile, so their heads were bigger than 95% of babies their age. Percentile rank for a particular raw score indicates the percentage of individuals within the norm group that achieved that raw score or a lower one. And standard scores are comparative. These can be used for reporting norms for various age or grade groups. And Stanines. The Stanine distribution is divided into 9 segments, or standard nines, each of which is 0.5 standard deviation in width. Stanine is simply 100 broke up into 9 different sections, starting at the greatest percent at the mean. So the score of 1 would be the lowest 4% of the scores, and 9 would be the highest 4%. So for a contrast, percentile scores can have 99 scores, and standard scores can also, but Stanines are only 9 scores, 1 through 9. Therefore, we get more of a detailed picture using percentile score.